get into some examples of structures that are anti like patriarchy, basically that we're presented with, right? And so here's some matriarchal examples, because people always say like, oh, women shouldn't lead and all of these different things. Oh, we can't have a woman president because of these like really archaic ideas of leadership and stuff that are based only on white men specifically and white men's gifts, I guess. But in elephants, right? Elephants are led by a matriarchal female, like, and their role is to defend the family. So that's something they say only alpha males do, right? Oh no, that's your job to protect everybody. Well, in other species, not the case. It's the head honcho is the woman there. And then finding resources, again, finding resources, if you translate that to humans, bring the breadwinner. That's what they're doing too. And then institutional knowledge, so teaching everybody. That's also what they do as well. And so the men of the kind of the elephant groups, they kind of be in little bull herds, basically. Like they're kind of like in separate groups. And yeah, eventually when folks is in heat and they gotta do all that, that's when all that happens. But like I said, when we was at the zoo, I was like, I just think it's interesting how that's set up, because in our society, there's such a like, just if anybody's not like a man or like a cis man, like white in some form or fashion in leadership, people have an aversion to accepting that version of leadership, especially if it's coming from someone that is against the grain of what society calls leadership. Like I've seen it a lot in my experience with Black women in leadership, of them being 30 times as capable, and I mean 30 times, 30
At
times
least.
as 30 times as capable. They actually care more because they actually trying to do the job, and their leadership isn't accepted because of their hair. What? Because they didn't say it in a kind way. And I was like, I guess that seems like some more misogynoir. So it's like, I like to look at this on that level, because it starts here. It starts in those picture books when you're 4 or 5 years old, when they start to tell you like, oh, it's the dad elephant and the mom elephant, and they have a kid. It's like, that ain't even how they rock. That's not how they rock. It's just not. And the next group is spotted hyenas. This one is where it got really interesting, because this is, I think, where we get into that essentialism, that bioessentialism. So in spotted hyenas, right? Spotted hyenas are larger than the males. So because they always say, right, men, they're bigger, all of these generalized statements, right? And then how does that generalized statement impact people? Like smaller men get impacted, then bigger women get impacted, and then folks that are non-binary get completely excluded. You know what I'm saying? So then that's where that starts to happen, right? Because now you don't fit those norms that aren't, you know what I'm saying? The norms that aren't correct. Doesn't mean that it's true. This is the interesting part.
Yeah, just reading it is already interesting. So I can't wait to.
So the spotted hyenas in the females, right? And we're using female and male because it's just what we have to use as language. I'm sure there's a zoologist that can give me the gender inclusive way to talk about animals, but I'm not aware of that at this time. But I just want to acknowledge that. But the females have bigger phallic organs than males. Now, phallic, for folks that aren't aware of what that word means, it's basically like the Washington Monument, a hot dog, phallic. That
That was
is
the
what
most
we're.
politically correct way of describing something I've ever heard you speak.
Hey man, I try, man. I try sometimes. And so they have bigger phallic organs than the males do, meaning like this idea, even down to our biology, that oh, there's only one way, there's just the male, there's just like how people will actively say that, but then have examples in nature that show otherwise. And mind you, they're about to come out with, they just counted, I think they're about to just, it might be today or tomorrow, where there's 8 billion people. 8 billion people. So out of 8 billion people, it's not even a part of folks' idea that someone could be born and have a different expression of these things out of 8 billion people that are born. That doesn't even scientifically make sense, because there has to be
Exactly.
difference. There has to be differences amongst in diversity that needs to be uplifted and needs to be shown, because what happens is then it's like you don't fit into being man or woman, and then you don't, there's no and then it's just this version of man or woman. It's not even like you get in a plethora of diversity around that. So the third thing I wanted to say is about the aggression, because that's the big thing with the alpha male folks. They be so, oh, men are just naturally more aggressive. In spotted hyenas, the women are more aggressive than the males, and they have more social standing and more social order. So it's not, again, a natural aspect to our society. It is a chosen aspect to our society of how it's set up. Because I have personally met many Black women in my life that I would much rather be taking the lead on a lot of different scenarios than just the standard, oh, the man makes the decision and is the leader. Like, that ain't really functional for how we do things best, right? For our mutual survival. So why don't we think about this a little bit more and not just have it be so this or that, when there's a lot more gray in there? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue because there's so much gray in everything. And I'm really happy you brought up the scientific aspect of it, because I think a lot of times people are like, oh, well, science says that there's an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. Science says if you have this, you're a man, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's important that when we're talking about science as a proof for a lot of these things, that we're not just, once again, confirmation bias, not just picking a science that works for us, but looking like I was a Coxside major. We did a lot of data science, data analysis, and a lot of, it's kind of not standard knowledge, but a lot of people are familiar with like a normal curve or a bell curve. Like that's how like grades get, the curve for the grades and whatnot, grades. There's the middle part of the bell curve where like most people are going to fall within this mid 67, 95% of the population, but you also have the outliers, and those are actually statistically significant. Like if you fall within the outlying parts on either side of a bell curve, that is statistically significant. And when you have 8 billion people in the world, like you said, like, yeah, there's going to be nuance. There's literally statistical measurements that talk about nuance, diversity within the data. All of that is very important to discuss. And it's easy for people to talk about that and stuff that they care about or they identify with, but then for some reason it's challenging when it comes to stuff like gender, sexuality, et cetera, et cetera. You and I, we are both Black males. There's very few things that we have in common on the screen right now, like very few. But people, a society for damn sure thinks we're both Black. And when it comes down to it, when it comes to, and that was the other thing I was bringing up. I also watched a video about hyenas this morning, so it's very funny that you also chose to highlight hyenas up and learned a lot about the Matriarchal Society of Hyenas. And it just really comes down to what you started this episode or started this discussion with, is you just threw out there gender doesn't exist, sexuality, blah, blah, blah. And you just kind of left it at that. And I want to go back to that because I think that's a topic that shouldn't be, though is challenging for some of our listeners to accept and understand. And I really just want to challenge folks to do the reading, do the research, because there's a lot of information out there about gender, about sexuality, and also just like understand that knowledge is limited. We don't know everything. Like you don't know everything. And I think it's important to acknowledge that ignorance and grow from it, because if this Natural Nonsense podcast started in 2013,
y'all would have had me on a barbecue pit, honestly, because I would have been 18. What 18-year-old, I wouldn't have read Bell Hooks or Sada Shakur I
Nah,
wouldn't have even got into Zoro no Hurston yet. You feel me? I ain't even touched none of that yet. That was not offered to me in school,
nah.
at
I
my
came
school at least.
I came into college ignorant as hell. But through growth, through conversation, through reading, through understanding
Experience.
the experience, like I eventually grew out of some of that archaic thinking. Like there's growth that has to happen here. And so